It's a privilege to be here today, and thank you so much for coming. This is the first time I've spoken in public before, but who could turn down an invitation to the Oxford Union? What is rape culture? Do you really understand what it is? And do you even believe that it exists? Rape culture is when thoughts, attitudes, behaviors in a society have the effect of normalizing and trivializing sexual violence. I'd like to take a moment just to look at the very phrase, rape culture. Because the very first time I used it, I actually came up against a lot of resistance. People felt uncomfortable with it. They felt unsettled. They thought I was going too far. They often felt attacked. And it made them angry. And at the time, I asked myself, why is this? Why do the very words rape culture make so many feel so uncomfortable? Could it be because it forces people to really look at what's going on in society? Could it be because it forces people to think about things that they've never thought about before? It is difficult to accept that we are all complicit in rape culture. Yes, we don't like it, and yet we are a part of it. And that's where the problem with the phrase rape culture lies. Rape, it sounds so extreme, yet we're all complicit in something so extreme and unacceptable. Dehumanization is at the heart of this culture. And when we strip a person of their humanity, they become vulnerable to violation. This is an incremental culture where everything is interconnected. And this isn't just about the individual perpetrators. This is about a systemic social problem with deep roots in patriarchal belief systems and ideologies about power, gender, entitlement, and male dominance. The misogyny and the sexist attitudes that exist in the social fabric of our society feed into the structures that systematically fail survivors. The victim blaming, the slut shaming, the coercion, the catcalling, the non-consensual sharing of intimate photos, the misogynistic abuse, you know exactly what I mean. These dehumanizing behaviors inform a culture where sexual violence can exist and thrive. With 16,375 testimonies on the Everyone's Invited website, we know that very sadly, rape culture is real. It exists. Yes, I am complicit in rape culture. Yes, you are complicit in rape culture. So, what is Everyone's Invited? In short, it's a place for survivors to share their stories. Our mission is to expose and eradicate rape culture with empathy, compassion, and understanding. My own experiences of this culture began in my early teenage years, and conversations with friends throughout my teenage years and school and university began to reveal just how widespread and prevalent this issue is for young people and everyone. I believe that the London I grew up in was characterized by an endemic rape culture that had a severe impact on my mental health, on my relationships, and on my confidence. And while finishing my degree at UCL, and at the beginning of the first lockdown, and after many conversations with friends about this issue, I was sitting at my kitchen table when I decided to share my own experiences of rape culture on my Instagram. And I was immediately overwhelmed with messages. Messages from everyone I'd ever met, really. Friends of friends, old friends, new friends, complete strangers, all reaching out to tell me how much they resonated with everything I was saying about rape culture, and also began sharing their own experiences and stories of harassment, abuse, assault, and rape. And with their permission, I shared these stories. And it snowballed from there, and the more stories I shared, the more I received. It was distressing for me to understand and come to terms with the scale of the problem. But it was so real for me. I knew many of the people sharing their stories and their most vulnerable moments. It was moving, and probably the most significant moment of my life. Realizing that I wasn't alone in my experience, and gaining strength from the incredible individuals who shared this trauma and understanding. So I felt compelled to create Everyone's Invited less than a year ago for survivors to share their stories. I'm so often asked why Everyone's Invited has inspired such a powerful conversation with so many. But I really want to make it real for you today, as I'm so grateful that you all came to hear me speak. I'd really like everyone here in the audience to close their eyes just for a moment. I want everyone to really imagine something in your life that you're embarrassed about, that you're ashamed about, that you wish hadn't happened. You wish you could go back and erase, but it's still in your mind. It could be something small, it could be something big, it could be something that you regret. It could be something you did to a friend or your parents, or it could be something that was done to you. It doesn't matter. Whatever it is, I want you to just take a moment to imagine it. And then, if you think about it, maybe you've never shared it with anyone. And all of a sudden, you're given a place to share it anonymously. That's what I did with Everyone's Invited. That's really all I did. I shared my story, and then I said, if you want to share your story anonymously, you can. And that act of sharing resonated with so many. And in that affirmation came a confirmation that rape culture exists and is prevalent, but also that there is a need for Everyone's Invited as a place for people to freely share without the fear of shame or judgment. Over the course of this campaign, many people have asked me about my own story. I'm often asked questions like, why you? And why did your story start the conversation? And what was it about your story that was unique? But that's just it. My story isn't unique. It's relatable. It's a reality that so many of us know. A reality that we've shrugged or laughed off, kept hidden, learned to cope with, and all I did was share my story. And it's probably the biggest obstacle that I've faced so far, finding the strength to share my story. And it was a voice that came from within. And it was courage that I found beyond the guilt, the shame, the anger, the frustration, the vulnerability, the panic attacks, the healing, the therapy, and the love from others that patched me back together. Sharing my story helped others see that they were not alone in their experiences. And people took strength in this. It empowered them to share, and what began as a small moment of sharing for myself spiraled into a powerful chorus of voices that would no longer be overlooked. There is so much power in a story, and the testimonies are extraordinary proof of that. The testimonies of the many survivors who have shared their experiences with us are driving this movement. Those who have been suffering in silence are rising up through Everyone's Invited, and it is a privilege of a lifetime to amplify their voices. We must listen to survivors. We must believe survivors. We, as a society, have been failing survivors of sexual violence since the beginning of time. Ancient concepts of rape involved the theft of a woman's chastity, which was the property of their male counterparts and relatives. Victim blaming is an archaic phenomenon, and early modern authorities equated rape with adultery and punished the victims for sexual immorality. We have been living in a culture that shames victims for their experiences, a culture that isolates, ignores, ostracizes, and silences survivors when they speak about their trauma and most vulnerable moments. Male survivors are even more stigmatized. 26 years is the average length of time that it takes for men to disclose details about their experience of sexual violence. LGBTQ+ individuals face a threat of sexual violence at disproportionate rates. We must highlight the importance of intersectionality in a rape culture and how different forms of discrimination, whether that be sexism, classism, or racism, overlap, intersect, and combine, especially in the experiences of marginalized individuals and groups. So, what next? Another question I am asked repeatedly. What will you do next? What's next for the campaign? How will you fix this? What's the solution? The truth is, I'm only 22 with a BA in English Lit. I think it's pretty obvious that I don't know all the answers. But I do know that there is value in moments of strength. Little moments of bravery in our everyday lives do have an impact. If you witness misogyny, if you see someone being mistreated, have the courage to call it out and stand up for those who don't have the strength, the knowledge, the power, or confidence to stand up for themselves. But let's do this with empathy and understanding. So, how did we get here? Who's to blame? What's to blame? And why do we place such an emphasis on blame? Why do we blame individuals and institutions for a cultural problem that we are all a part of, instead of investing our energy blaming others? Why don't we take responsibility for a culture that we are all complicit in sustaining? We are all the products of our environments. Environments where misogyny and harassment is normalized, where abusers are excused and not held accountable for their actions, and where victims of sexual violence are just not believed. Rape myths like the notion that false accusations are commonplace and that women are liars, or that because there was alcohol involved, it was unintentional, or that she brought it on herself because of what she was wearing or how much she was drinking. These myths dominate prevailing social norms and exonerate abusers and rapists. Rape is a choice, not a mistake. These are the words of a leading academic in the area of positive bystander intervention, when she said to me that rape is a choice and not a mistake. It made me stop and think, and they stuck with me, so I really wanted to share them with you guys today. We must remember, rape is a choice, not a mistake. In talking further to this academic, they taught me about being an active bystander, which is an area I've always been interested in because I do believe that it could be one of the areas which could help eradicate rape culture. It sounds so easy to be an active bystander, but let me tell you from personal experience, it's not. I don't usually share anything about myself, but I think I am going to today. When I was about 17, I went to Berlin with a group of my close friends, and we were having an amazing time, and we always wore what we want, and we were going out, and we were harassed almost every single day on the streets. And when we were harassed, we always shouted back. And there was one night out, and it happened again. They were older men across the street shouting at us, catcalling, misogynistic abuse, all of that. And we shouted back. And we were bottled. They threw a bottle at us, and there was glass everywhere, and there was glass in my leg. And in hindsight, this was obviously a foolish way to react. We shouldn't have shouted back at strangers or put ourselves in danger like that. But, being an active bystander, it seems so easy, but let me tell you, it's actually a lot harder than you think. You have to notice the event. It could be a misogynistic remark, an unwanted grope, recognize it as problematic, be motivated to assume responsibility for helping, and possess the skills to safely and effectively intervene. I really hope that in talking to you today, I might inspire some of you to be motivated to do something like that. And you also have to know the people, of course, and don't do it with strangers like I did when I was 17 in Berlin. It's about having the courage to intervene and stand up for what you feel is right. It's not easy. It's socially uncomfortable. And silence is the easy way out. I think we should take a moment of self-reflection and ask ourselves, is this who we are? Is this who we want to be? Does it feel wrong? If it does, it's probably wrong. Call it out. Thank you so much for listening to me, but before I finish, I really wanted to share with you what Everyone's Invited has already achieved. We've had well over 1,000 pieces of media coverage from all around the world, which means that the conversation about rape culture is ignited around the world. Everyone's Invited has been a catalyst to the government, we provoked an Ofsted review in schools, and I quote from Ofsted, "The review was announced by the government on the 31st of March after anonymous testimonials of sexual abuse were published on the website Everyone's Invited. This review will seek to find out whether schools and colleges have appropriate safeguarding measures in place and consider whether current guidance is understood by schools and colleges, and whether it is sufficient to help them respond effectively to the allegations." We have also prompted new guidelines from the Office for Students, which have been published for universities. Everyone's Invited has provoked the launch of the NSPCC helpline for survivors, and we're currently working with the Department for Education. This hasn't happened because of me. It's because of the 16,375 testimonies that change is happening. And when I'm asked what's going to happen in the future, the focus will be taken off individual institutions and will shift onto the culture. In fact, it will actually shift onto you. Thank you.
Soma, thank you so much for joining us, and thanks for such a wonderful address.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, it's a real honor to have you here. As you said, Everyone's Invited has already achieved so much, but let's start by talking about what's next.
Yes.
Are the testimonies themselves enough to make a difference, or should we be looking for structural change to follow through on those testimonies?
I think that, this is a culture that is universal and it exists everywhere and it's in every part of society. So that requires change coming from every area and every corner. So it is about the testimonies, which have started this incredibly powerful conversation, but it's also about the institutions and the people in power and, everyone. This problem is in all schools, it's in all universities, it's on the streets, it's at home. I think everyone has a responsibility.
And as you said, a lot of the time, this is something that we talk about with our friends. I'm sure many of our audience here tonight will have had these conversations at home, but why do you think it took so long for our generation, who are often prolific users of social media and like to use our voices, to come out and start speaking about this?
I think that we have just been living in a culture which stigmatizes sexual violence to such an extreme extent that people genuinely don't feel that they can speak about their experiences. And when they do, they're invalidated and not believed. And, as a survivor, if you're coming forward and sharing a traumatic moment and you're met with even the hint that what you're saying isn't valid or true, it can be absolutely earth-shattering for that individual. It can feel like a second assault.
And you're right, when you gave the people the chance to speak anonymously, it sort of felt like the floodgates opened in a way and thousands of testimonies started pouring in. How do you think we should react to the sheer number of testimonies that we've seen? Should we take the time to feel shocked, or is that not productive?
I think it's uplifting. I think it's just incredible to see survivors coming forward in such huge numbers and feeling able to share and verbalize experiences that they've probably been hiding and been so ashamed of for so long. So to have that opportunity and to have that release and that sense of catharsis is, amazing. And it's just incredible. And I'm so moved by the bravery of all the survivors who've shared their stories.
And some people might say, well, this seems to be something we're talking about a lot already. We saw the Me Too movement and the Time's Up movement. Can you talk a bit about how Everyone's Invited is different to those?
So I think, they're both very important, and I don't think we would be here today without them. However, I do believe that Everyone's Invited is trying to shine a light on everyone. And it's not really about spotlighting an institution or an individual. It's about opening it up and not narrowing it down, and just, really exposing the extent of the problem. Because when you focus it and you narrow it down, you actually really limit it and you make it seem like it only exists in one place. And I think you saw that with Me Too, when actually it's about addressing the wider complex web of abuse and people and everyone who is complicit and allowing it to happen and occur.
And do you think people have been quicker to dismiss young people getting involved in Everyone's Invited because they are younger, or because perhaps the instances of rape culture that they're talking about seem sort of a lesser evil, or sort of less illegal at least?
I don't think that people have been dismissing young people so far. I think it's extraordinary to see the response from the schools and the universities and the press, really. I think this is a problem that everyone really relates to, and it's just amazing to see, people listening to survivors for the first time. And yeah.
So Everyone's Invited began with the opportunity to add the name of an institution where the instance occurred. You removed that for a time and then you put it back in. Could you tell us a bit about the thought process behind that?
So we were naming schools initially, and we decided to stop naming schools. And we actually have stopped naming schools so far. However, we did start naming the universities. The reason why we stopped naming schools initially was because there was quite a focus on one demographic. And the reason for that is because I went to a private school and then I went to a university in London. So logically, you saw the first response and the people being exposed first to those stories. It was people from that demographic. So there was this big focus on specific schools, and we believed that it was quite disproportionate and biased, and it wasn't reflective of the reality, which is that rape culture is everywhere. It's in all of society. It's in all universities and all schools, and it's not just limited to one kind of school or one demographic.
Do you think that the decision to name schools originally prompted a larger response from the government and institutions?
Yes. At the beginning, I wasn't naming schools, and I was doing it for about 10 months. And then as soon as I named schools, it did get everyone's attention. We decided to do that because we did believe that it was important to hold schools accountable, because they do have a duty of care to their students. They have a responsibility to them. So we felt at the time it was important to do that. And sorry, also one other thing is it also helps survivors come forward. So if individuals from one institution come forward, and then they can see the other ones from that institution can take strength in this and also feel able to share.
And you spoke about being an active bystander in your address. Yesterday we hosted our Difficult Women panel, and Gina Miller spoke about how she felt a duty personally to speak up against the misogyny that she was facing. How do you think we balance this line between being an active bystander and placing the burden on tackling sexism on women and girls?
So I think that we should all live with this burden. I don't think anyone is exempt. I think everyone has a responsibility. Just because I think everyone is guilty and complicit, yes, women are disproportionately affected. However, they are also complicit in sustaining a rape culture. Internalized misogyny exists. I don't think anyone is perfect. I don't think anyone could really stand there and say that, they've always stood up for someone that they've seen being mistreated, or the victim of sexualized bullying, or, even things like excusing a friend or a mate because he's such a great guy, even though he's abusive. That all of those kind of things are so commonplace, and people don't realize that behavior is really damaging, and, being complicit is allowing rape culture to perpetuate and continue.
And what advice would you give to young people who want to be more involved in Everyone's Invited, be more active bystanders, be involved in this culture change?
I would say, have the courage to go against the grain and stand up for people and call it out. If you see someone being mistreated, call it out. You can, and it doesn't have to be in an angry way. It doesn't have to be, about ostracizing that person who's in the wrong. It can just be a nice conversation that's open and honest, where you can broach the topic and explain why what they're saying or doing is harmful. But I do think it is about having the courage, because it's not easy.
Could you tell us a little bit more about what it was like as you saw the campaign start to take off? Like you said, you were doing it for 10 months almost by yourself, and now it's such a national and international thing. What was that like?
It's extraordinary. I could have never imagined that I would be here in this place, in the Oxford Union. It's just been amazing. Especially when I started, I think I spoke about it a lot in my speech about how rape culture felt quite almost controversial. And to see it in print, to see people using that language and terminology so widely, and it becoming part of a national conversation is just extraordinary. And yeah, I don't know how many adjectives I can use, but it is just amazing. It was definitely a difficult journey, many ups and downs, and I definitely did not do it alone. I've always had amazing friends, an amazing team, so resilient and so hardworking, who have helped me every step of the way.
And what advice would you give to our audience members, to young people who maybe have an issue that they're passionate about beyond sexual assault and sexual violence that they really want to tackle? Maybe they feel like they can't be the person to make that difference.
I think you can do anything. If you believe in the cause, I think it is about courage again. It's about being brave, and anyone can be brave.
Well, I'm very keen to leave a lot of time for audience questions. So if you do have a question, please raise your hand and we'll take some for Soma. Have any questions? We'll start with the gentleman in the green. Please, can you stand up? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Soma, for speaking with us. You've spoken about a school's duty of care to their students and about having empathy and kindness. I'm interested to know what you think about, once abuse has happened, what role do individuals and institutions have to play towards the abusers?
Mm-hmm. I think it's important that abusers are held accountable for their actions, but I also think it's really important to provide, a space for change. I think, everyone deserves a second chance. In not every case, but, in a lot of the behaviors within rape culture. And it's really important to create those spaces and to have that empathy, because if we want to move forward as a society, it's really important to be progressive in that way.
Another question from the audience? Yeah.
Thank you so much for speaking. Obviously, I think we all know the internet can be a bit of a double-edged sword. So I want to ask, has there been any kind of backlash from Everyone's Invited, sort of people not believing, or people think what you're doing is wrong or should be stopped? And how have you dealt with that?
Yes, I think there is always backlash on the internet. I think that the backlash is actually quite important, because it's evidence that the debate is happening and the conversation exists. And, it helps us, and, we can see where more work needs to be done, and maybe identify places and demographics where we should be trying harder, or maybe adjust our strategies towards. Yeah.
And what are you proudest of that Everyone's Invited has achieved in the last year and a bit?
Probably the survivors and them sharing. That's probably the most yeah, I'm definitely the proudest of providing that platform and, giving people a sense of catharsis and community and empowerment, and also in many cases a chance to heal.
Is there a flagship sort of, I guess you could call it institutional change, legal change that you think, that's where we need to be going, or that's what we've done?
I don't think I can single out one thing, because it is a cultural problem. It's so deeply embedded in the culture. And changing a culture means shifting those deeply entrenched attitudes that exist, at the heart of society. So, to change a culture, you need to talk about it. You need to have the conversations, and you need to keep having them. And that requires everyone. So it's not just about institutions or the government who set guidelines or safeguarding guidelines, because if the culture doesn't change, those things don't matter.
We'll take another question from the lady at the back. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was brilliant, Soma. Gender relations are often viewed under a general aegis of progress. We've come a long way, we're going a long way, which I think hampers this conversation being had, particularly between a specific demographic. One thing your research has really revealed that there, in the last few decades, have been developments which are actually entirely novel to those decades. And I was wondering if you could just talk about how recent technologies, particularly online platforms, online sharing, proliferate kind of sharing of information, how that is kind of producing novel and contingent problems.
Yes. Technology, as was mentioned before, is a double-edged sword. Everyone's Invited would not exist without it. However, I do think that social media and the rise of that has really exacerbated a lot of existing issues and behaviors in rape culture. So things like cyber flashing, back in the day, that was a flasher on the street. It's now an unsolicited dick online. The bullying that happened in the classroom or the pub is now happening in those places, as well as group chats on Facebook and Instagram. And, TikTok might be a bit old for that, but it has exacerbated existing problems. But it's also part of the solution. And social media is a very powerful tool.
Any more questions from the audience? Yep, the lady at the back.
Thanks so much for speaking today. I mean, what you've done is amazing. And I guess I just had a question about when you were naming universities. To no one's surprise, Oxford came out as the second highest number of named testimonies. And, as someone who's had first-hand experience and other survivors of just how, for want of a better term, absolutely shit the university's policy is when it comes to survivors, and who works with one of the student-led organisations to help combat that and pick up the slack, I guess, what do you recommend we can do, like further work on the ground to help those who have suffered?
So, obviously, I don't have all the answers. However, I do think it's very important to adjust the approach and make sure that we are prioritizing survivors and that we're creating spaces where survivors feel supported, where they're feeling listened to, and we're just making sure that everything is in place so we can appropriately address the allegations and really make sure, again, that they're supported properly.
I think we have time for a few more questions. The two ladies at the front.
Thank you for your talk. It was really, really good.
Sorry, could you stand?
Okay. How would you say we can tackle our own internalized misogyny?
So I think it's really about self-reflection and thinking about your past and thinking about your own experiences. And just reading the testimonies is also a really powerful tool to understand how everything works and how the kind of normalized, casual, less kind of seemingly trivial behavior can actually contribute and inform this rape culture. So definitely self-reflection, thinking about your own actions and thinking about how, you can make a conscious shift to becoming a bystander, a positive bystander. And yeah, just checking yourself.
Just on that, yesterday we spoke about how a lot of women might not be ready to come to the table and accept what's happened to them and what's going on more generally. Has that something you've come across when you've been campaigning?
Yeah. I think everyone processes trauma at their own pace. And, trauma can be repressed, it can be delayed. And a lot of the testimonies talk about that if you read them. And, it's lifelong and it's not always coming out immediately. And I think, everyone should be processing things at their own pace and never feel any pressure to act or behave in any way. Just take your time. And yeah.
To the other, do you still have the microphone?
Hi, Soma. Thank you so much for your talk again. You've talked a lot about kind of instituting change on society as a whole and kind of involving men in the conversation as well. And perhaps the best way of doing that is through education. I was wondering how far back you think we need to go and at what point this conversation needs to start to make real change on a cultural level.
I think earlier than you think. Do you mean in terms of parents talking to their children?
Yeah, kind of on that level. And also in schools as well. Like, at what point does this conversation need to start?
I think this conversation can start really early on, and it doesn't explicitly have to be about sex. I think it can be just about things like empathy and boundaries, and maybe instilling those as family values, teaching those in things like a concept like consent in the classroom can be about, can I give you a hug? Yes, and then hug. It can be really simple. Just instilling in young people and children the importance of empathy and understanding other people's experiences and looking out for others.
When you read the testimonies, is there any that stand out to you? Do you think that there are some that not more powerful or something like that, but have there been some that you think, you've really seen that survivor come forward in a different way or anything that stood out to you particularly?
I think all the testimonies are unique. There was one that I read a few months ago, actually last month, and it was from an 8-year-old, and she was talking about her own trauma, her daughter's trauma, and her granddaughter's trauma and experiences of rape culture. And I think for me, it really highlighted the intergenerational quality of this problem and how this is an archaic issue that has always existed. And I think that was quite powerful for me.
It's something we spoke about earlier, women looking out for each other. I worry for myself, I worry for my sister. What advice would you give to women and survivors more generally as they look to sort of heal as we move forward culturally?
I think I would say, take your time. Don't be hard on yourself. And you can always go on the Everyone's Invited website and read the testimonies and just know that you're not alone in your experience and that you should never be ashamed for what you've been through and that it wasn't your fault. And yeah, take your time to heal.
So it's been an absolute honour to have you today. Thank you so much for joining us. I'll finish with a question we've asked all of our speakers. If you could take everything you've learned, everything that you've seen over the last few years and bottle it into one thing for our members to take away, what would that be?
That is a difficult question. Oh my gosh, I don't know. I guess maybe go with your gut and believe in yourself. I think even though it's simple, I think it's really true. And there are definitely moments throughout this process where I was really bogged down and I found it really difficult and I had a really hard time. But just sticking to what I believed in and just following through and not giving up was important for me.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.